Hello Internet, welcome back to a Northern Monkeys video. Oliver unfortunately is moving this weekend, so he won't be able to do his usual sort of data sheet and discussion in regards to the tabletop. So in lieu of Oliver being otherwise incommunicado, I've volunteered to do a little bit video just to tide you all over in the interim. So for any of you who managed to get through my previous video, about an hour, talking about kitbashing and tanks and trying to talk about some of the philosophies and things I like to look at in relation to the hobby, I thought I'd have a stab at making a smaller one, just a quick tutorial just about some useful things that you can do in relation to actually the hobby aspect. So today we're going to have a quick look at how you might look to create some fur on some models. With the Space Wolves coming out and the new kits, obviously a lot of those have got some very nice detailed looking fur, but it might mean that you might want to add some more to some of your other models to try pull that aesthetic all together. So very quickly, what we're going to look at in this video is just some practical tips, how to approach it, what you can expect by way of results, and then what you can do about those results if you're not getting the things that you were hoping for in those first couple of attempts. Here are just a few examples of some of the green stuff work I've done for fur. This is by no means, masterclass level sort of work. As everything, I consider myself for the most part a journeyman in relation to the modelling that I'm doing, but this is just to show you that it's possible with a little bit of work just to achieve good results and obviously give your models that bit of sort of feral kind of Space Wolvesy aesthetic. Okay, so some of you may be experienced with using green stuff and are aware of its properties and how to work the material. Others, this may be the first time you've ever tried to do this. So I'm going to give you a little tip that helped me when I was trying things out. Obviously green stuff is expensive in relation to what you use it for. What I would suggest you do is, before you actually crack open the green stuff and start mixing it and getting it on a model where you've only got a set amount of time to do that, have a couple of practice models lying around, some marines maybe you've made but you've not painted yet. Get yourself some blue tack. Now, blue tack is the stuff that anyone doesn't know that you kind of use just to stick bits of paper up against a wall. It's kind of a bit like plasticine, although it has a couple of other properties. Principally, it'll give you the same kind of tactile response the green stuff does when it's freshly mixed. It's slightly tacky, and it does allow you then to sort of experience a lot of the difficulties that green stuff can give you, whilst allowing you to practice it, which is risk-free, because obviously if you do badly with the blue tack, you can just pull it off and have another go of it, whereas obviously the green stuff will eventually cure and then you'll be putting it in the bin. So little cost-saving option for you there. Get yourself some blue tack, get yourself some old throwaway models or something you've built up that you're not necessarily looking to paint yet, and that'll give you an infinite possibility to practice some of the things we're going to talk about today. What I actually use when I'm trying to sculpt on a model is predominantly toothpicks. Another nice cheap alternative. It's also something obviously that you can then use for other things, like in my case clearing out super glue holes in my actual adhesives. But it's useful, multi-purpose, and you can keep a nice edge to it, and you get a box of 300, they'll last you a long time, and you can bin the ones that you sort of end up using up, or if you've lost the edge on them. So I usually have 2 or 3 toothpicks kicking about the desk when I'm doing this work, and I have what you might call a fine work tool as well. Now this is a bit more unique. There is a wool type hobby that my partner does, which is where you kind of knit the wool together with little needles with hooks in. I think they call it I can't remember the name of it now, she'll kill me. But essentially it's a small needle. It's about the length of a sewing needle, and it has a little hook on the end. I'll put a picture on it in relation to that. And what it essentially does is it gives me the ability to really dig into the green stuff with a fine sort of edge. So what I will go through in relation to my method is an overview, but yeah, those are the things you need. Some blue tack to practice with, some toothpicks in relation to doing the mainstay of the work, and then you want something small like a sewing needle. You could use a sewing needle or something like that. In fact, to be fair, you've probably got things like paper clips kicking around the desk if you're doing any kind of work by way of pinning. So you could use a paper clip as well for that. Okay, so here's the bare bones of what we're looking to achieve. You'll see there on the picture I have a blob of blue tack sat on a paint pot. You can see 2 or 3 toothpicks, and there you can see that needle for needle felting. That's the word I was supposed to use earlier, needle felling. That's the tool that I have procured of my partner in relation to her hobby that I've stolen for mine. And you can see on there I've managed to get my stylus pen to work on my laptop, so the doodles are a little clearer than they were on the other video with the tanks. But you can see there I've got 2-3 arrows, different colours, and that's to just denominate the kind of work we're looking to achieve. So obviously if you observe things like fur and things like that in the wild, there's a general movement by which you can usually sort of expect them to hang and move in relation to an object or about a person. Obviously, if you think about things like a wolf or something like that, they have that kind of big fur bit at the top, and then it kind of leans out and goes thinner as you go down the length of the creature itself. But more generally, fur tends to look a bit like the way you might expect the motion of a wave. It will rise and fall, it will undulate, it will group up, and then it'll sway this way and that. I would liken it to basically imagine the flowing of a river. You have a big strong river running, so you have a main flow of all the water travelling down in a certain direction, but within that flow you get little eddies and traps and loops and twists where the individual flow is determined by other factors, and it will twist and turn in relation to it. That's what we're looking to try achieve with this fur, is to get a general movement of the fur in one direction, a common direction, but then within that actual flow of direction we use the smaller implements to try build in a bit of variance and a bit of character and a bit of depth in relation to the actual material itself. Okay, so here you can see some initial indentations been put into that blue tack. What I'm looking for is just to get some interesting shapes in relation to the major flow of the fur, to try give it some interesting features and some interesting qualities we can tease out and play with later on. And here we can see the rough intent as to what we were looking to achieve. So the main flow in yellow is obviously down and round, and the red ones are the smaller sections that look to play a little bit within those rules. On this picture you can see the yellow arrow is essentially the main flow of the fur, what I'm looking to achieve. To simplify it then, we've just got the 2 red arrows which will show essentially veins or gaps in the fur that will act as the principal branching off point, and then in purple the smaller lines that are kind of like the little eddies and currents that I'm looking to try create, again just to add a bit of depth, add a bit of perspective in relation to the fur. And here on this photo you can see us putting that into practice on one half of the blue tack. So we have that main vein down the middle, again that thought of that big yellow arrow going down the centre. The 2 reds are the rough flow of those separations, so where we might have big gaps, where we might look to build that in. And then again the small areas, the purple lines, is where we would look to make those individual tufts to give it kind of that fur feel. And here's the same image from the side. Again, the thing to bear in mind is that this is a rough estimate. I'm just trying to visualize what's kind of going on in my brain, but it is very much a case of sort of going with the material and seeing what works. You can see there's some sort of chops that flow up and towards the center, but then there's some bits that sort of break the other way. It's a case of just doing it by feel, trying to get a proper shape that you're happy with, and then obviously coming back to the bits that you are less happy with and sort of cleaning those up, giving it another go and sort of bending those forms into new shapes to try kind of get a more pleasing look to the material. In each iteration, what I've essentially done is I've taken the toothpick and I've made large sort of gaps in the material, so I've driven that from the top to the bottom following the line of the arrow, and I've created these contours onto the surface, and then as I've created that, I've tried to pull the smaller areas. So obviously the yellow is very much the main source, so it's not going to move a great deal, but it might just drift slightly from left to right. And then the red, obviously there's a bit more scope to be more pronounced, so you can drag that across. If you can imagine it's being sort of caught in the wind and it's pulling the fur from left to right. And then with the purple, I'm looking to do that again. And in each instance, I'm attempting to create what you can see there as lines of intersection. So where a red line and a purple line might meet, you get these nice little tufts, these sort of curving triangular forms that allow you to kind of begin to see how the fur might sort of sit and clump up in relation to the environment they're in and the actual motion of the object as well. Okay, having discussed the basics of what we might look to try achieve, let's throw some blue tack on a marine and see if we can make ourselves a pelt. In order to do this, we're going to apply our 3 rules again. We're going to have a general flow, which is going to be obviously identified by the yellow arrow going down the middle. That's obviously where the fur is thickest. That's going to be the least area of movement. And then we're going to have the 2 reds, which sort of are going to attempt to create that dimension and that depth, giving us the flow on the edges. So like those veins, the 2 main strands that are going to be the attached to the yellow, but in one way or another they'll vary. And then of course, using those purple lines, we're going to look to recreate a bit of movement, a bit of the environment then affecting the pelt to give it that kind of immersion on the actual model. Okay, and here are a number of photos of that said marine with the blue tack pelt on. You can see there is some cross sections and where the fur sort of breaks off into these tufts, and you get that nice kind of sense to the fur. It's not perfect. I'm literally looking to do this with a couple of minutes. It was just to show you really the use of the blue tack, but what can be done with just a bit of practice on it. So as you can see there is some good sections on the right, and if we look to the overhead picture there, you can see where the pattern on the actual blue tack is much tighter, as we sort of discussed previously, but that pulls it in and that gives it some nice shape and some nice definition on the top. Then we have a picture from the left at the back. Now I left this picture in to show you what can occur, and you should expect it. You might get a really nice section on the fur, but then the way in which you've moved that around then makes the other side look far worse. Maybe at the stage when you were balancing this it looked fine. I would expect, as I said before, to be coming back to the pelt before it cures so that you can get the most out of it, and even consider, later on I'll discuss, you can add extra bits to the pelt once you've set down a baseline if you go away from it and then decide that you're not happy with what you've got and you want to just tweak that material. And as you can see from this photo here, there are areas of the work that I've done, even where I'm happy with it, where really I would want to do something else in relation to those sections. So it's very much trial and error. The bits talk to each other in the sense that, you know, they flow into each other. So a part that is really nice near the top can potentially ruin a bit you've done previously if you revise the top. So you got to look at the whole thing as an entire piece, and it may be that you create a very nice piece at the top that you have to then run back down to correct. Okay, so let's say you've had your practice, you've decided you want to give this a go with some real perishable green stuff. I've got a couple of slides for you to see now that just talk about how I approached it, pitfalls, what to try and look for, and how you can get a good result from the material. So this is a piece I'm working on for a friend. He wanted a Space Wolves Leviathan Dreadnought. I hope he doesn't see this before he gets it, because I haven't actually sent him these pictures yet. But you can see here I'm attempting to attach green stuff, and already you can tell that I've given it a slight tint from right to left as it's looking at the picture. My intention is to have the fur sort of sweeping towards the outside of the model. If I can get it far enough over, I may even have some of the tentacle ends of that fur reaching over the edge of the actual plate proper. So you can see from the last couple of pictures that I've got general movement of the fur from the right to the left, looking to make sure that the material does follow that discussion previously. Now obviously the big yellow arrow is pointing roughly that way, and I want to try build some movement and a bit of dynamism, which is why I've put lots of little red marks on there to try and indicate what I'm looking to achieve on it. Now I initially went in quite hard. The green stuff itself is quite thick, it's quite a big blob of green stuff, so I wanted to make sure that those big sort of defining bits and gaps were going to be very obvious, that it wasn't just surface, it didn't look like it was just a fluffy ball. I wanted to give it a real sense of a thick shaggy coat. So you can see there on this image I've essentially got quite deep with the toothpick, got quite deep, pushed it in, again looking at that thing going from right to left, but got some interesting movement in relation to those bits and pieces that I can then sort of play with the smaller tool. Now at this point I was pretty happy with the way the fur was looking across the midsection there. You can see there's some interesting big tufts. Obviously this is a big animal, so I wanted to make sure that we had a proper scale to it in relation to the actual fur itself, the pelt. And there you can see it without any of the doodles on, just so you can get a feel for it. You'll notice it's very shiny. One of the things I discovered with green stuff, which you may come to also do yourself, is that the material itself is much better to work if the material and the tool you're using is wet. Now, partly that prevents the stickiness, also gives you a really nice finish, but also it's useful in relation to just trying to move the tool through the green stuff. Now, I actually found a really good medium for that, again another cheap one around the house, is cooking oil, like they call it rapeseed oil, or just just some sort of fat or some kind of Vaseline, anything that would act as a lubricant that would allow you to maneuver the material and not necessarily let it stick, because obviously if it is too sticky, much like the blue tack, it will start to deform and it will start to go badly. Now you'll see in the bottom right of that fur there are a couple of straight lines. Now I don't spot this till much later on, and I do highlight the fact in a photo later that is something I would come back to, but clearly the general form at that top from the right across the centre where there's those big prongs of fur I'm really pleased with. I would probably be thinking at that point to get the smaller tool and just do some more work in relation to that. So not happy with all the pieces on there, but you can definitely see the progression. You can see that it's heading towards those things that I've spoken about. Now these two pictures again very close together, one where I've drawn in the lines I was looking to achieve, and obviously then you can see one without, and this obviously now is very much more like the fur that I was hoping for. It's flattened out in relation to the overall bulk, and you can see there's those cross sections. What I've done with that is, as I said, I've set up these lines with the toothpick, and then I've gone in again with that very fine tool. We'll just call it a sewing needle for now. And I've gone in with that sewing needle and I've just drawn from the bigger lines across into the other. So I've crossed them over so that as they move down the material, you've got... Okay, so let's say you've had your practice, you've decided you want to give this a go with some real perishable green stuff. I've got a couple of slides for you to see now that just talk about how I approached it, pitfalls, what to try and look for, and how you can get a good result from the material. Top of the actual tufts as well, so it obviously makes it much more sort of natural form, more of an organic shape. And in these last couple of shots you can see the final sort of product. The front facing picture shows you the tufting that I was referring to and the way that's kind of worked out. Overall I was pretty pleased with that. You can see at the top I've added some little tufts at the top just to try and marry that into the actual plate itself on the dreadnought, and down the corner there you can see Obviously the detail as it relates to how that fur ended up coming over the plate on that side, going from right to left. Okay, so first image here, it's the one we talked about earlier, where the top section of the actual fur was quite nice. I was quite pleased with it. The overall impression was nice, but just really the danger point was that straight line, which I've highlighted in red there, which just wouldn't look right in relation to the rest of the thing when I was looking at it. And I came back to it and did some more work on the actual bit. Just had some tufts that sort of very much pulled away from the core of the fur, as if it was flat on and it was just pushing out. And that seemed to do a chunk of the work. But as I say, do bear in mind that this is a sort of fluid process. As you create a piece further up, you're likely to change the material below and change the shape of that flow. So you obviously need to think about it in totality. If you are in a position where you've got some tufts in, you're not happy, you can make little cones if you're making horns for a Space Marine, and you can use those with the toothpick to just kind of add new depth or add new sort of density to the actual fur itself. And that's what I did in my instances. I essentially worked on that corner a little bit more, let it all cure, built it all out, and then just added some extra bits on. In this photo you can see there's lots of nice swaying sort of tufts. The tufts are bigger, but the whole pelt in general is a lot flatter. And again, just really looking at those red parts where you can see that the green stuff is awfully thin, so it's beginning to kind of stretch and it looks less like fur and looks more like something else. So obviously I'd be mindful to go back in and look at that. If it's already wet, if it's still wet rather, I would look to try kind of reshape that and just use some other green stuff if I had some spare to kind of bulk that up and just change the shape of that. Obviously if it was dry, I'd go in and I'd just use some extra bits and just try to sort of retool that area there. And the last one here is just to highlight that even though I'd essentially thought I'd fixed that problem, there is still some niggles on those little bits that I added on. In short, the way the tool has actually pulled the green stuff, it's given it a weird edge, so it looks crumbly, or it looks like it's got debris on it. So I'd obviously want to go back in and just clean that up. So there's various ways you can do that. Again, mostly using things like toothpicks. Those bits that I've added on in addition, I actually just ended up flicking off and just doing it again with some fresh green stuff once all that had dried. Right then, I promised Oliver I'd make this video a little bit shorter. Hopefully I've achieved that goal, coming in at something like 20 odd minutes, so an achievement compared to the hour on the last one. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was of use, and I hope it encourages you, so give this stuff a go. It is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this part of the hobby, obviously, hence why I've made this video, but I think it does do a lot for an army on tabletop, and I think it's an easy skill that you can, with a bit of practice, you can sort of master and put in some really good quality pelts, and that will just raise the level of the envious board watching at your games. So thanks for watching. Feel free to comment if you have any thoughts particularly about what you might like to see. That's obviously for Oliver and his data sheets, but also in anything relating to modelling itself, the kitbashing, things like that. I'm open to suggestions, but do make a comment if you'd like, and obviously subscribe if you would like to see more videos from us. Ta!